Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and today we're going to talk about some DLC speculation. This has been on my mind for quite some time considering that I'm a big fan of Slaanesh and I've been trying to think on how Slaanesh could get more attention. Especially since the roster is pretty much complete. This is the usual case for most of the demons because, well, you know, it was one army book, not monogods. And I feel like a great way to do some Lord packs is doing some big matchups, whether it's Lord versus Lord or race versus race, as, let's be honest, a few of the DLCs haven't really had lore-friendly matchups and it's been kind of weird. I'm looking at you, Hunt and the Beast. So the idea I have, as you've seen on screen, is the Princess and the Lord. Jumping in with a very quick edit, as I've just realized the Sea Lord and the Denied sounds much cooler. So yeah, apologies, this is the new title. Slaanesh versus High Elves, something which is incredibly lore-friendly, and I mean, just sounds kind of cool, doesn't it? For those not aware, Slaanesh has this addiction to high elven souls, well, elven souls in general, but she does prefer going to attack Ulthuan as much as possible. But this would not be an Ulthuan. In fact, this could easily fit in rather well when, say for example, the Realm of Chaos map, and then be expanded upon further within the Immortal Empires. So I've got a few ideas, and let's just jump right in. Before anything, the reason why I'm saying it's not centered around Ulthuan is mainly because there's been some early data mining regarding Total War Warhammer 3 and obviously the Immortal Empires, and it seems that N'Kari starts very close to Ulthuan, so if N'Kari is taking the fight to Ulthuan, this DLC idea kind of focuses on the idea of what if the High Elves took the fight to Slaanesh. So we'll start off with the Slaaneshi section, as that was the easiest thing to write in terms of abilities and all that, and obviously this is led by Dechala, the Denied One, and her army is known as the Tormentors. Fun fact, there is a rogue army known as the Tormentors, which is a direct reference to her. She is known as the Princess and the Lord, mainly because, well, she was a High Elf princess many moons ago. So let's give you a little bit of context regarding her. She was a High Elf princess, as I've said, born in the province of Nargothrond. Now, a demon prince of Slaanesh was very attracted to her, because, well, you know, demon princes and Slaaneshi ones, and chased around the family all over Ulthuan. But eventually, the demon prince struck a deal with her father to hand her over in an effort to leave the rest of the family alone, something which you wouldn't really expect from a father. You'd expect them to protect their child until death. Dechala was pretty much given away and forced to marry the demon prince Samael. Now you'd imagine that the princess would have been forced into servitude, but the princess, in her rage and anger, decided to embrace Slaanesh's blessings in an effort to take revenge on her family, because if they're going to sell her off like some cheap cow, she's going to slaughter each and every one of them. Such an act obviously drew the attention of Slaanesh herself, and this is where things now get a little bit more Maury Povich type of thing. Samael grew jealous of the attention that Slaanesh gave to Dechala and complained to the god of pleasure himself. However, such a thing only angers Slaanesh, where the god of pleasure stated that as long as she does not wish to be Samael's concubine, she has no need to, and that she would only be his wife should she return through her own state of mind without any influence of Samael himself. Now, this might sound a little strange because it's obviously very out of character, but this is because Dechala herself had fallen and had become quite devoted to Slaanesh. But here's the kicker, so now, Dechala may not become a demon in her own right. Keep in mind that she's not a demon, she's just very heavily mutated, for as long as Samael exists in his own right. So if she wants to become a demon prince, she needs to kill Samael. So this is where she gets the title The Denied One from, and there is a lot of possible plot points here that we'll go into later when we start going into a theme of the DLC. Now let's talk about the character herself, how she works on the tabletop, and how she could work in Total War Warhammer 3. And yes, I know the miniature's ugly, it's from 5th edition, that was like the 90s, so yeah, they'll have to update that, that's for sure. Anyways, she leads Warriors of Chaos warbands. This is because she's not a demon, but rather heavily mutated, so I imagine that she'd be a perfect Warriors of Chaos themed DLC. But she could easily be moved to the Slaaneshi roster, it's just I feel that she could work really well for a Warriors of Chaos DLC, just to kind of add in the Slaaneshi parts that would be needed. She's a melee-based character on the tabletop, not a spellcaster, very proficient at close combat, as you can see, very high weapon skill, high strength, high toughness, a lot of attacks because, you know, many arms. So I imagine that she would translate exactly the same, where she'd be able to be quite the anti-infantry unit, but also a very good duelist, mainly because, you know, many arms flailing about, you could do a lot of damage. Think General Grievous, but as a snake. She'd have all the basic stuff, so loads of different weapons, she'd have Chaos Armor, so she'd be fairly well armored, the Mark of Chaos, so as Mark of Slaanesh, and obviously she would hate Khorne, so this would be something as a skill point that she would automatically unlock. Same as all the heralds and characters throughout Warhammer 3 at the moment when they come to the monogod rosters. She does have some special rules known as Dances of Slaanesh, and basically these are all different abilities that you can pick in close combat. I imagine that these could be done as actual abilities. So say for example, the Praise of Slaanesh makes her harder to hit because, you know, wailing around her swords like General Grievous. That could easily be a skill point which increases her melee defense and maybe the reduction to shooting and all that type of stuff. So it's simple enough. Then the next is Dance of Death, which gives her +1 to all her hit rolls. Obviously that's not here in Warhammer 3, so instead this could be an ability which could, for a few seconds, maybe 10-20 seconds, just give her increased melee attack damage. It's simple enough. Maybe some attack speed too. And finally Dagger Dance, which you can see here as a bit of a defensive, but I could see this being done very differently. You remember Deathmaster Snickage? He's got a ability which will allow him to basically whirl his blades around and all that. How about if Dagger Dance ends up being that, where you stick the character in a blob of enemies and then just Dagger Dance? Lastly, she does have 2 magic items, but it's a bit strange because, well, you know, 5th edition kinda dealt with things a bit strangely. So first we have the Elixir of Damnation, where if she wounds an opponent, then they can't use shooting attacks on her, they can't in hand-to-hand combat her, or cast any spells at her, which obviously would be extremely broken. So I imagine that this would be more of a buff type of item, where she'll pick up the elixir and she'll get a lot stronger, maybe increase her ward save for a while, which would be a long-lasting ward save for maybe about 30 seconds to a minute, which would only be used once per battle, so it wouldn't be that overpowered. The second one would be Many Arms, but, well, you know, that's kind of attached to her, so I don't imagine that would be a skill point because that's literally attached to her. So Creative Assembly would have to think something up with regards to special items, but that's okay. I think that works out quite well. This is a decent character, and I know some people are thinking about other characters, but we'll talk about that later. I just think that she'd be great for a Slaaneshi thing because she has motive to go kill some High Elves anyway. Now we'll get deeper into the Slaanesh portion with regards to new units and so on, but before anything, I think that this is the perfect time for them to introduce Slaanesh Warriors of Chaos, Slaanesh Chosen, all that type of stuff, reskins, recolors, you know, in an effort to have the Slaaneshi forces looking like Slaanesh, all the Warriors of Chaos stuff, which would affect Sigvald too, so it's kind of like a win-win. And I'd say the best way to go about this is that the reskins would be paid for content. I know some people wouldn't like this, but that means that a lot of attention could be made and gone into here, as the High Elves don't really need that much too, and we'll talk about the High Elves a little bit later, but that means that a lot of attention could be making this faction really unique and making the Warriors of Chaos split up. Eventually we would have DLC like that for Khorne, Nurgle, and Tzeentch. So in short, the only way to get access to these reskins would be purchasing the DLC itself. This means for Sigvald too. However, this would mean that we'd get everything that we're needing right now with the Warriors of Chaos. The Slaanesh side, obviously. So unique looking Chaos Warriors, obviously the spellcasters and lords looking more Slaaneshi, and having access to the lore of Slaanesh, all that type of stuff, which would only be available to Slaanesh Warriors of Chaos factions, and then obviously Chaos Undivided, because it makes sense. So, you know, Archaon and Kolek. I can't believe I just forgot what his name was. Anyways, let's carry on. Obviously, it wouldn't all just be reskins, because I'm not too sure what people would see in an idea like that, but there would be some unique units for Slaanesh. The first would be Pleasure Seekers, and yes, this is a demon unit, but the way I see it is that Dechala would have access to them because she is mutated and she is favored, so it makes sense for her to have some demons, and we'll talk about that a little bit further when we get to the end of the Slaanesh portion. And then this unit would then go automatically to the Slaanesh roster, so Nakari would have access to them, and obviously Daniel too, so Chaos Undivided. This would be a fast-acting monstrous cavalry unit. You see on the tabletop, they were actually really quick, movement 10, they could move around and do a lot of damage. They wouldn't be the best in terms of, say, for example, output with strength and toughness, but they had a lot of attacks, and they would have all the same rules, so poison and everything else. But they'd be a bit tanky, so that means that you could get a little bit more of a tanky unit, something to hold down your enemy. We've seen a mod like this that made them slower, but I'm saying make them faster and make them just be able to keep up, or at least be a bit slower than the steeds. These were from the Storm of Chaos, a rather popular supplement from 6th edition, and it just makes sense because it adds in a little bit more flavor. Plus, you know, it would just be nice to have a more tanky unit for Slaanesh at this point. Mind you, the Chaos Warriors would have tanky units anyway, but this would automatically affect the Demon faction, so it's kind of like a win-win again. Then we would have a new unit here, which is Pleasure Knights of Slaanesh. This is what I am calling them, which is essentially just Pleasure Seekers, but with a mounted Chaos Warrior. So they would be heavily armored, they'd have access to Lancers for anti-large. Depends on the weapon, really. It's just really giving a few examples here. And this means that everyone would have access to it. So obviously Nakari would have access to it too, I think, because it just kind of fits. Sigvald, because Sigvald would need these units. And then if we do get any more Slaaneshi characters, that would be for them. And obviously Archaon and any Undivided characters, because I feel like they should try to more or less mimic, well, not mimic, but complement the monogod idea. So there could easily be two variants of this, all shielded, but one with, you know, sword and board and the other one with a lance, because there you go, it already adds in for a lot of different things. Plus, it gives more of a feeling of a dedicated Slaaneshi faction, which I think is kind of important in general. But I think that would be it with regards to Slaanesh units, as there's really not a lot coming unless some new stuff comes out. Keep in mind that they could create new units like they did for Tzeentch with the Doom Knights. So it's not completely out of the question. If you guys think there's anything particularly lacking, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. But I feel like this should focus very heavily on having a fresh coat of paint per se for the Chaos Warriors for Slaanesh. This is not a recolor. This is not getting the generic Chaos Warriors and painting them pink or purple, because that's just one table. Like, you could do it yourself at this point. I'm saying for a complete visual overhaul, and it would be pretty special because that means that you'd have your own unique faction. Now, in terms of how this character could work, well, this is a character that could be found in the Chaos Waste because, well, she can be found in the Chaos Waste, and to add in any special mechanics, because obviously she would need some, they could take inspiration from the Glory mechanic from the Demon Prince to be able to add in something very like Glory Light in a sense, where she could attain glory a little bit as time progresses, doing various different things, maybe by defeating enemy factions and all that type of stuff, and get access to a few demons. So she'll already have access to, say, for example, the Pleasure Seekers, but that could be locked behind this glory light because it's a demon, not a mortal. Some basic demonettes, some heart seekers, seekers of Slaanesh, some chariots, not the whole roster, but just a few demons, just to give this a little bit of flavor and make it stand out from, say, Sigvald, who should only be warriors of Slaanesh. I think this kind of works out in general. But now we'll look towards the High Elf portion, led by Sea Lord Aislinn in the Lothan Sea Guard. So, a little bit of context. This is a character who leads the High Elven fleet. Obviously, we do not have naval battles, but it could be represented in a certain way. You know, pseudo-hordes are a thing, and it could be an interesting way to introduce a High Elven faction, as it would be more aggressively focused, especially when we go into the lore. So the character is Sea Lord Aislinn, and he's very hot-headed. This is a character who is known to be quite aggressive. He is determined to stop the Norscan raids upon Orth-1, so he himself has decided to attack the Norscan coast. The character unfortunately does not have a model, whether they'll decide to use the generic Sea Lord or decide to create a new one, because he does have some art. Well, I think the only art actually exists from a trading card game, despite the fact that he's been mentioned in the lore heavily through Storm of Chaos, and obviously then 7th edition, 8th edition, and a few other books too. But I guess not having a official model and just a little bit of art that they could expand upon is quite good for the art team, because that allows them to be creative. Whereas, you know, in the Warhammer series, they kind of have to focus on the model more than anything else. But because this character was just for the Storm of Chaos, he doesn't really have a lot going for him in terms of a playable tabletop model, I mean, by the way, but he does have a special rule known as Master of the Mists, which allows him, well, his army to have a round of shooting right before the game starts, which doesn't really make sense for Total War. So I imagine that this could be done as a special effect. Think about it this way. You know how the monogods have like different abilities that they get in the battle? So if you're Khorne, you're killing stuff and you get that ability and so on. It could be like that, where you could do something, maybe as you spend ammunition, you could get these abilities, but they wouldn't be really powerful. So say, for example, one could make them run faster, the other would make them have better accuracy. This is obviously as a area of effect. And for a last one, I'm not too sure. Keep in mind that this would still be a high elf, so it's likely that he would still have access to rights because he's a Warhammer 2 character. And it could work in a way where Master of the Mist could be linked to a unique right only available to him. In terms of how the character would work, well, he was supposed to be modeled after a prince, so he would be a melee character, possibly range 2 with a bow, but I imagine that the character would be very good at melee, so a pretty good duelist, and focus heavily on buffing units, obviously having access to a Lothan Skycutter as a mount option and a horse, and we'll get to the Lothan Skycutter soon, but you already get to see some pretty interesting things. As for a possible start location, well, he'd be a pseudo-horde, so that means that he could literally start anywhere, and then you could start empire building from there. I've got some ideas on how the faction would work, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Let's start talking about the roster itself. So the Sea Patrol has its own unique roster, but most of it was based on kit bashing and repainting. As you can see here, the Lothan Sea Rangers are actually Shadow Warriors, the Mist Mage is a mage, the Commodore is a commander, the Stormweaver is an archmage, Sea Lord is a prince. The idea is that you just could use models that you already had and just paint them differently, and there you go, you had a new unique roster, which is something that's happened already with Elfarion the Grim. So it's not out of the question that they could do this again just to have a little bit of a shake-up, and that means that you have a unique roster with this character, which would be kind of cool, as that means that you can just play around with a different type of play. Having Shadow Warriors early on, but obviously as Lothan Sea Rangers, and, you know, just the basic stuff. And this, I imagine, would be pretty cool to say, you know, getting the Lore of the Depths from the Vampire Coast, and adding it to the High Elf faction as Stormweavers and Mist Mages, but only the Sea Lord Aislinn's faction. This means that you can have some fun and have more of a unique style of play because you'll have a different lore of magic that you're not commonly using with the High Elves. So this would be a completely new roster in a sense, very similar to what Dechala would have, but a bit less because these would actually be recolors, maybe with a few assets being changed around here and there. In terms of truly unique units, I can only really think of two, but then again, it's pretty much all we need. First up would be the Merworm. This is a big monster, a Forge Worlds monster, so we'd have something absolutely massive, and it's something that we've all been waiting for since the Vampire Coast, because, well, we've already kind of got the assets, they just kind of have to make the rigging and so on, I guess. I'm not too sure how that works, but this is a large aquatic monster, which would be able to do a lot of damage. It's got regeneration. I mean, it's a big beastie. Think of this as the High Elf equivalent to the Dreadsaurian. Obviously a bit smaller, bit faster. It would still be durable, and it would just be a big beastie that a lot of people seem to like anyway. And, I mean, it's the Merworm, it's kind of cool. Now, what could be done in a cool way is, since Aislinn would probably take some stuff from the Vampire Coast, well, why not give undead Merworms, so a literal reskin, to the Vampire Coast? So this would be DLC, which benefits other factions too, and you've seen that already when I mentioned the Dechala stuff, but this is a concept which I think could work out quite well, as that way the Vampire Coast gets some undead Merworms, seeing as you do kind of kill Aminar, which, yeah, you do raise him, and I don't think that we'd get Aminar, but it would be nice to get undead Merworms. And the last unit would be the Lothan Skycutter. Keep in mind that both the Merworm and the Skycutter would be available to all High Elf factions. So the Skycutter is a moving artillery piece. It's a bolt thrower which flies. It's supposed to be highly mobile. This is going to be quite interesting to see how it's done. Mind you, we do already have that that kind of with Tzeentch and stuff, especially with the chariots. So it's already possible, and we've already seen a lot of people do that with mods. So we could possibly have two variants, one that's focused heavily on shooting with a bolt thrower, whereas the other variant could just focus on arrows. So you have an archer squad, and yeah, you can just move around quickly. The idea is to zoom across the battlefield with these things and do damage. It could also be used in close combat because obviously it's being pulled by a giant eagle. And yeah, it'd be kind of cool, wouldn't it? It'd obviously be like a tier 5 unit, both that and the Merwin would be, but you kind of expect it because power levels and all that. But now let's look towards how it would work in terms of plot, because obviously, you know, just saying Slaanesh versus High Elves is cool because, yeah, you know, it's a big matchup, but you need a accompanying plot. Now, the way I see it is the following. Dechala is obviously trying to get rid of Samael. This is so she can ascend to demonhood, and well, she kind of wants to get rid of him in general anyway. Now, Samael was, as far as I know, created just to kind of fill out Dechal's plot, so he's got nothing in terms of lore, so he could easily be the plot point here. Say that he's been weakened and now is the time to strike. Dechal's preparing her forces and amassing a mighty warband. However, the High Elves of Wolf-1 know about Dechala and are worried that she might become extremely powerful because she is already powerful in her own right. So if she becomes a demon prince, this could spell the doom for Wolf-1. Not trying to cause any panic, the Phoenix King has sent Sea Lord Aislinn to deal with this matter, and this is where it gets kind of similar to that of, say, for example, the Silence and the Fury, where the end battles would be kind of different. So Dechala would have to go from location to location to hunt down Samael, defeating other warbands in the way, maybe Khornate, Tzeentchian, all that different stuff, while also going for all the different Warriors of Chaos factions there and trying to subjugate them in a sense. You don't have to, but it would be a nice benefit, and that would automatically change them in terms of how their armor looks and just in general. But the end goal would always be the same, going to defeat Samael. So you'd start off in the Chaos Waste, you'd start doing your damage, and you'd go into a quest battle, which would have you defeat him, and, well, you know, they could use the pieces of Daniel just to kind of make a Slaaneshi Demon Prince, so there we have Samael. Now, after you defeat him, you would not be able to ascend to demonhood because the High Elves have now caught up to you, and you have to defeat them before you're able to do so, and then after which you'll then get some benefits and, you know, faction-wide stuff, bonuses all over the place and all that. You know, the typical thing. However, for the High Elves, it would be a bit different. So, you start in the seas. Maybe you could have multiple different start locations you can pick. I don't know if the engine kind of allows for that. It would be kind of cool though. But the main thing is that you would be a pseudo-horde and you'd break ground and start taking territory. Then you'd start recruiting normal High Elves and all that different stuff, the usual, you know. But it would take from the Vampire Coast once again, where there would be pseudo-legendary lords, which are also pseudo-hordes too. Which, yes, I know very well it would not sound so great because there's not a lot of ocean when it comes to the Realm of Chaos map, but then think about it this way, it's a mechanic which would be very useful in the Immortal Empires. So you've got a little bit of a... This is a feature that works well here, especially for the main character, but becomes a lot more useful when it comes to the Immortal Empires. So it's thinking ahead about the future, which I think is alright. You'd be tasked on taking out different demon factions, and eventually you'd have your quest battle. But rather than facing Samael and then eventually Dechala, Dechala has already beaten Samael. So in this point, you'd be fighting an already powered up Dechala with a few different waves. I don't know, maybe they could make something interesting around it, but I think something like that would work very well. It's taking inspiration from a lot of previous DLC, but it's DLC that worked out quite well, so yeah. When it comes to FLC, I don't imagine that there would be much, but hear me out, it's because the patch will be bigger. So when it comes to a FLC, I imagine that they'll go for a Legendary Lord. I don't think it's going to be a High Elf because, well, let's be honest, there's a lot of High Elf characters, and Aislinn would kind of add to that a little bit of bloat. Mind you, I'm happy with High Elves because they're cool, but I don't think they could justify another one. That is until they start adding in other High Elven locations, or we wait to the Immortal Empires and we get something dedicated for that. So what they could do is add another Slaaneshi warrior, maybe in the form of, say, for example, Styrkar. He's a Norskin character. I don't know if he would be a Warriors of Chaos character, or if at that point there's already been a Norscan rework, because there could have been, you never know when DLC like this could happen, obviously keep in mind that this is speculation anyway, we could get a Slaaneshi Norscan character, which could be possible. It would be nice if we did get a little bit of an expansion, because they're really shoehorning chaos into it. That's more Games Workshop than anything else, so maybe? Or, and something that I do like, which they did with the Silence of the Fury, is just bring in a Legendary Lord, which doesn't really fit with the theme, so just anything else and maybe just put it into the Mortal Empires. It could work in the Realms of Chaos too, but even now, it does feel kinda cramped with, what, do we have 11 Legendary Lords? It's a lot of Legendary Lords, and we'd probably get a few with upcoming DLC, a Warriors of Chaos thing, and this and that, you know? So I'm not opposed to them making it Mortal Empires only, like kind of like they did with Dryka, for example. But hey, maybe you guys have some better ideas. Obviously, I'm just spitballing here. This is the speculation stuff, which is always really fun. And then with the upcoming patch, what we could do is get a rework for a sub-faction. So I did mention Morathi a while back with a Dark Elf DLC, but at that point I said, yeah, the Dark Elves would need a rework, and I've just realized over time, maybe 2 reworks would not be possible. However, here, I'm saying that this would be after a Warriors of Chaos rework. The High Elves are okay at the moment, so I don't think they need too much changing. So maybe with the accompanying patch, you know, a Morathi rework, kind of Cult of Pleasure, you know, back into the old days of the Storm of Chaos campaign, make Morathi so much more different than all the other Dark Elves. This would obviously only be in the Immortal Empires, which gives people incentivization to kind of purchase the other games, I guess, but it's more the fact of, well, you've already played this Dark Elf, you've played that Dark Elf, you like Dark Elves, but you want something different, you want a completely different campaign. Well, what about a Dark Elf with some Chaos Demons, just a few of them, you know, some Pleasure Seekers, some Demonettes, and a few Warriors of Chaos. So rather than playing the Dark Elves with a lot of range and a lot of skirmish, here you've got a bit of range, a lot of magic, and a lot of armor, plus the skirmish with the demons, so the accompanying patch itself for the DLC would be absolutely massive, and I think something like that would work out quite well. And yes, I know this sounds very, very selfish of me, because it's basically just a lot of Slaaneshi stuff, but I've had this idea for a while, mainly because I would really like Morathi to be a individual sub-faction, I guess. And a Slaanesh vs. High Elf DLC, that would be pretty big hype, because it's a very big plot point in the whole history of Warhammer Fantasy. It goes way back, thousands of years in the lore. Yes, this is all kind of wishful thinking, but I kind of think that this would do quite well. I don't know, let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and let's start a bit of a discussion.